oftentimes in life, and you can review your own life 10 years ago, 20 years ago, depending on how old you are, of course. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Perspective, we talk a lot. People in general, as we look at our lives and the lives of others and our children and our parents and so on and so forth. Whether we think directly or indirectly, we search for context, right? And a lot of times that context is, what is your vantage point? From where are you sitting that you make this observation? Admittedly, we tend to be more selfish in our thinking and just think me. What am I doing? Where am I thinking from? If we even... Anyway, I don't want to get into psychology, but we all know there are times in our lives when every thought we have is based on this viewpoint, these eyes, these ears. What do things look like, sound like for me, without even considering what that vantage point, that viewpoint is in? Do you see what I'm saying? We think in here instead of in everything, because our environment is our vantage point. We don't tend to think that way. And certainly if we did spend more time thinking that way, we might be more inclined to consider the environment, the universe, let's just say environment, that other people's vantage point are in. We don't even consider that normally, do we? We just consider that they're in ours. But theirs is different than ours. And if we started to think that way, we might then get a better picture for why we have different points of view. It's in our language, but we don't really consider the largesse of that, what that means. We're too busy in here, right? That's that ego. That's that self-protected identity ego that we're always talking about in Buddhism. Thank you for being here. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So appreciate your participation, your practice. And of course, your support. As I always say, like, subscribe. It helps grow the reach of the resource, which is proliferation or propagation of these teachings. So it is a bodhisattva effort. Thank you for doing that. And some of you recently, where did I just get a PayPal? I think, was it from Lulu? Yeah, you guys are consistently buying books, buying ebooks. Much easier to buy the ebooks in cost and in shipping and in all that. Especially so many of you are in countries around the globe where shipping from the United States could be really terribly expensive, yeah? So I'm glad the ebooks are finding their way into your hands that way, so it makes it much easier. Again, comments, suggestions on books in the bookstore that I may not have made available as ebooks yet that you would find or are interested in having. So why do I say this about perspective and point of view? Well, Nichiren, in Opening of the Eyes, has been talking about this constant discussion that we have. I say constant, but we hear about it often, about these developments of Buddhism and how certain sects or groups have offshooted from the core teachings of Shakyamuni and adopted or adapted, and that's more problematic, the teachings to their own ends, to service their own political power, popularity, so on and so forth, right? So we can see the history of Buddhism is no different than the history of man. Our default position as human beings is to use our sentient minds to manipulate our environment, seemingly, to our personal needs. And to the degree that we're motivated more or less, you could say that we go from greed to benevolence. A lot of times moderated by what we have at any given moment, right? When you have abundance, you're more likely, not always, but you're more likely to share, at least some, depending on your insecurities or securities, right? It's a very complex formula, 3,000 realms in every single thought moment. Aha, there it is. But in general, human beings tend to be rather self-obsessed. And there are reasons that are helpful, but there are many reasons that what we end up doing is creating a hard shell around ourselves and really impede our full experience of our own lives. We don't tend to think of it that way, but this is what we talk about quite a lot in Buddhism. And Nichiren is now talking about it in terms of Buddhism and the teachings themselves. So understand when we read Nichiren and we read sutras and we read expedient means and so forth, we're not reading about something other, even though it may be directly referencing Buddhist teachings themselves. All of the teachings are about observing how our mind works, not only in our own self, but in the self that is the environment. So it's very social in nature. We might not always think of it that way, but any problem that we can, with words, identify within our own minds is a reality, a situation, a mode of acting, right? Karmic action that is social. In fact, beyond social, because as we've already discussed, life is the universe. So anything that we're doing in our minds is also what is being doing in our environment, which includes the universe. So all of it is the domain of Buddhism and the way things function, right? What is, as it's been described many times, enlightenment? The goal of enlightenment, the fundamental understanding, the truth, as it were, of all phenomena. That's not just you and me. That's not just the United States or Malaysia or Earth. It's the entirety of the constantly, moment-to-moment instantiation of potential life. It's very big. So, back to Buddhism. Nichiren is in the midst of, once again, discussing these different branches, as it were, or deviations from the core teachings of Shakyamuni. And he says, according to these schools, he's already enumerated, see the last video, the flower garland patriarchs Tu Shun, Chi Yin, Fat Sang, and Cheng Quan, and the true word masters Shan Wu Wei, Qing Kang Chi, and Pu Kung were far more eminent than Tendai or Dengyo. They were more well-known, much more popular. Moreover, they claim that Shan Wu Wei's teachings descend in an unbroken line from the thus come one Mahavarachana, which right away you should be chuckling a little bit, because Mahavarachana is an invention of Shakyamuni's. It's not a real thing or person or place, right? But if you make that mistake of literal magical thinking, not, in other words, missing the point that Mahavarachana is an aspect of Buddha-ness that Shakyamuni was using to teach. And instead, you say that your teachings form an unbroken line from this teacher, Mahavarachana. You're talking about what? An invention. If you said to your friends, what I'm about to teach you, I've received this knowledge in an unbroken chain of credentialed, real teachings from the flying spaghetti monster, right? I'm not saying Mahavarachana Buddha is equatable to this flying spaghetti monster as a mode of thought, but it is equatable as a source. Shakyamuni taught these personages and these ideas to explore ideas to get more insight. And in a way, the flying spaghetti monster performs the same function, although far more elementally, showing that the idea of deities and gods ruling your life is just as silly as a flying spaghetti monster, yeah? So it has similar function, it's just one's far more base, in my opinion. But, point made, right? You wouldn't claim that your teachings are authentic because they so are scholastically bound to this mental idea of something as though it created the thoughts you're having. See, that in that is built the denial of truth. Right? So, for these scholars, so well known, so honored, to say that their teachings are superior because they're an unbroken line from the thus come one, referencing Buddha-ness, Mahavarachana is this kind of magical thinking again. That's not Buddhism. If they reference Shakyamuni Buddha, you could give them credit for, so their logic stems from the guy who started this whole thing. But to take one of his imaginary stories and say, that's my cited source, it's a little muddier, isn't it? You can't say unbroken chain. You could say, I reference my teachings from this teaching of Shakyamuni, Mahavarachana. Okay, that's logical. I understand that. That makes sense. But to say it's an unbroken scholastic academic chain whose source is this mentation, you're referencing vaporware again. That's not Buddhism. So let's go on. How could men like this, Nichiren says, who are manifestations of the Buddha, possibly be mistaken? They ask. They point to the passage in the Flower Garland Sutra that reads, quote, some people perceive that immeasurable numbers of kalpas have passed since Shakyamuni attained the Buddha way. Of course, we know that's wrong. It isn't Shakyamuni that existed since time without beginning. Duh! Here's that magical thinking again. That's not what Shakyamuni said. It's translated in that way, but that's grossly misunderstood. He's talking about Buddha, not him. Buddha has existed since time without beginning, because Buddha is a state of mind, a state of knowing, a state of experience. Not Shakyamuni. He makes positively sure you understand that when in the lifespan chapter, he says, you guys think that me, this man that's existed this many years, sat under this tree and somehow created Buddha. And that's wrong. In reality, Buddha, something I attained in this life as a man, has always existed. That's what he's saying. But here it is misinterpreted again. Or the passage in the Mahavajracana Sutra that says, quote, I, Mahavajracana Buddha, am the source and beginning of all things, end quote. Well, this is Shakyamuni telling this story of Mahavajracana Buddha because at some point before the Lotus Sutra, he was trying to get people to understand that it was Buddha that is the source, the engine of life. That it doesn't begin with Mahavajracana, but that the mental cognition of enlightenment, which he's using the label of Mahavajracana in this particular sutra, is the realization that Buddha-ness, the awareness of this engine of life, is something that has always existed since existence existed. Because it's the engine of life he's talking about. Energy of potential manifesting moment to moment in all of its potentials, albeit within tendencies and conditions, particular to galaxies, particular to supernovae, particular to you and me. We're all manifestations. We're entire galaxies. I am the galaxy Sylvain. Pleasure to meet you. There's so many things going on in your body and your mind right now. You can't possibly be aware of all of it. Oh, just got a new liver cell replacing an old liver cell. Really? Did you experience that? Well, you're experiencing it bodily, but are you consciously experiencing it? No, you're glossing right over it, right? But that doesn't mean you can't mindfully be conscious that that is what you're experiencing, right? This is what Buddhism is constantly trying to navigate. Your awareness and how to use your awareness, how to direct your awareness. Because it's that very same awareness that gives you the false sense of ownership, of permanence, from which you get anxious, experience emotions and pain and worries about. This is the very thing Buddhism exists to release you from. It's self-created, but it's self-created out of what we read all the time, ignorance, simply not knowing. So if you can shift your mind to a place of, okay, relax, this is all happening, but it's not I don't own it. I'm experiencing it. Knowing that, how can I be in it fully and how can I incorporate it into my being as an exciting, amazing experience rather than all of this invested thought into collecting, owning, getting rid of what is mine, what is not mine. That's all politic that doesn't belong in my experience of life. It's a tough mental shift, isn't it? Because we like our stuff. But you don't have to get rid of your stuff. You just need to think differently about it. Right? I, Mahavajracana Buddha, am the source and beginning of all things. Well, Buddha-ness, since time without beginning, again, Buddha is the sentient mind perceiving. Right? There was no Buddha at the Big Bang. But what Buddha perceives is the act that created the Big Bang. There was no consciousness or mind there to perceive it. So don't get mixed up on that. A Buddha is something that you and I experience as the result of having a sentient mind. We don't have a sentient mind before we enter the womb, and we don't have a sentient mind when we cease to exist. Because our human existence is the apparatus with which the sentient mind emerges. Not the birth of the universe. Why, they ask, would anyone claim that it is the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra alone that expounds the doctrine that Shakyamuni attained enlightenment long ago? Well, it doesn't. Shakyamuni didn't attain enlightenment in time without beginning. No. The enlightenment that Shakyamuni attained has existed since time without beginning. Shakyamuni fully states in the Lotus Sutra, I'm a man and I attained this in this lifetime as a man, but, so he doesn't deny that. He simply says, but understand the Buddha that I attained didn't start with me. That's what he's saying in the lifespan chapter. No matter how it's translated poorly, that's what he's saying. And this becomes clear only after much study and reading through Nichiren and all of this. It becomes apparent, as I caution you always, that the cultural biases, the English biases, the religious biases that translate these teachings constantly manipulate to satiate their own egos. But the truth of the teaching still manages to come brilliantly clear, no matter how poorly translated, yeah? I mean, that very thing is the reason I started this whole mission of a channel, a website, because I got sick and tired of the misunderstandings that people just ran with, because it's comfortable. Oh, that story. Oh, I can go with that. I can be part of that club. No, think. This is so much more important, more profound. And in Nichiren, I found a perfect mentor, because I feel Nichiren's frustration here. I understand why he's doing what he's doing. He's a hero. I know that word is bounded about easily, but seriously, if you consider Nichiren's position in medieval Japan and his insistence that all of these other Buddhist scholars were just not reading and getting the point, and obviously in some cases deviating for the point of their own egos, he was calling them out. What an amazing man. Now here comes the comparison that I was trying to allude to in the introduction to this video today. Persons who do so are like frogs at the bottom of a well who have never seen the great sea, or like a mountain dweller who knows nothing of the capital. Quote, you people look only at the lifespan chapter and know nothing of the flower garland, the Mahavajracana, and the other sutras. Do you suppose that in India and China and in Silla, Korea, and Pekche, or Korea again, people have confidence that these two doctrines are limited to the Lotus Sutra alone? So, as we have seen, the Lotus Sutra, which was preached over a period of 8 years, is quite different from the earlier sutras preached over a period of some 40 years. If one had to choose between the two, one ought by rights to choose the Lotus Sutra that was preached later, and yet the earlier sutras in many ways appear to carry greater weight because they've been around so long, yeah? But again, frogs at the bottom of a well, mountain dwellers not knowing the capital. He's talking about ignorance of our own environment. We tend to see everything from our parameters, our tendencies and conditions. So the frog looking up at the surface of the water sees a very mystical other place that he knows nothing about. And he starts to make assumptions on that other place based on being at the bottom of the well. But until the frog experiences being away from the bottom of the well and looking back at the bottom of the well from the perspective of being above the water, oh, this is totally different than I thought it would be, yeah? Because now information is streaming in his brain, his mind, that hasn't before been available to him. And this is what happens when we chant. We become aware of an enlightened state, a Buddha-ness, that transcends, transmigrates away from our tendencies, conditions, earthly, samsaric environment in our minds, and expands to include the entire environment of which we are in and part of and generated by. Oh, ignorance starts to ebb away. Understanding becomes not difficult. It just becomes matter of fact. Oh, that's why we tend to forget these major leaps in our karma, because as soon as we make the leap, it's not a different place. It's a place that's shed all the baloney that we've been dragging along. Oh, we don't need all that anymore. It's just so, oh, look. Yeah? Things become clear. Where are we? Okay. While the Buddha was still alive, there would have been good reasons for choosing the Lotus Sutra, because there he is standing in front of you. This is the latest teaching. This is the way for you to self-realize Buddha-ness. Yeah, he's alive. You're learning from this teacher. Still in your mind, you're saying, "Well, it's him." You're still not inculcating what he's teaching as your own. Right? This is the biggest stumbling block. But in the ages since his passing, the teachers and scholars have in most cases shown a preference for the earlier sutras. Yeah, because they're easier. They're easier to take responsibility for, right? Because ultimately, to become Buddha aware, that's on you. Nobody can hand it to you. No amount of passing tests and qualifying and word chases and so forth is going to give you enough gold stars and medallions to make you equal to Shakyamuni. Because that's not what we're trying to see. That's the big stumbling block again. We're not trying to be equal to Shakyamuni or Mahavarachana or Amida or any other Buddha. We're trying to accomplish Buddha itself. And in the Lotus Sutra, this is Shakyamuni's entire teaching. How do you instantiate Buddha itself? Not me, Shakyamuni, your star quarterback. Right? It's a subtle point, but it's an incredibly powerful and critical point. Following the earlier teachers, people don't have to be confronted with that exactly. They are, but in a much more docile way. In the Lotus Sutra, the gloves are off. This is you. You need to do this. This is how. Previously, this is what you can achieve. This is what it looks like. This is what you can do. See the difference? Not only is the Lotus Sutra, Myoho Renge Kyo, itself difficult to believe, But in addition, with the coming of the latter age, sages and worthies, they gradually disappear from the scene, and deluded people increase in number, including quote-unquote teachers. People are prone to make mistakes even in shallow worldly affairs. So how much more likely are they to be mistaken about the profound Buddhist teachings that led to enlightenment? Good question, Nichiren. Vatsa and Vaipulya were keen and perceptive, but still they confused the Hinayana and Mahayana sutras. Vimalamitra and Madhava were very clever by nature, but they could not distinguish properly between the provisional teachings and the true teachings. These men lived during the 1,000-year period known as the former day of the law, not far removed in time from the Buddha himself, or Shakyamuni Buddha himself, and in the same country of India, and yet they fell into error, as we have seen. He's talking about 1,000 years as not so far away. It's quite a period of time, yeah? Well, for us humans, anyway. How much more likely, therefore, that the people of China and Japan should do so, since these countries are far removed from India and speak different languages from it. There he is, Nichiren pointing out something I'm always harping on. Cultures, languages, the bias of the way we think culturally, right? It's our tendencies and conditions writ large in a culture, right? There are differences. Karma, the engine of karma, differs by location, not just, again, self and environment. Self and environment, it's always present in Buddhism. You are not just you in whatever country you're in. You are a chunk of that country. Even if you move there later, you have adopted cultural realities, tendencies, and conditions into your freight train of karma. How could you not? You are not separate from your environment. Now human beings have grown increasingly dull by nature, their lifespan diminishes steadily, and the poisons of greed, anger, and stupidity continue to multiply. The number of distractions you and I face today in 2023 are so vastly manifold, multiplicity, what's the word? The magnitude, orders of magnitude, right? I remember when I was a kid, we used to talk about 6 billion people on the entire planet, and I thought, that's an unfathomable number. Suddenly, a little later in my life, we were talking 7 billion. Wow, how did we increase 1 billion in just a chunk of my life? Now we're at 8 billion. Oh my goodness. Just think, 3,000 years ago, were there even billions? And if there were, 1 billion and 8 billion is a vastly different number, isn't it? I'm saying the number of humans because I want you to understand that the distractions, the pulls on our ego, our struggle to identify ourselves as unique, vastly different now than it was then. Forget the technology, but add technology on top of it. How we even, in today's world, manifest an idea of self. And immediately, just saying the word self, I can't say it without perceiving this very thing that we're doing right now, social media. Who am I? Am I this representation on social media? You might think you are, but then think again how you're perceived. You can't possibly know, not with 8 billion, or actually I should say 16 billion eyes, right? How could you possibly know who you are? From a samsaric perspective anyway, no wonder we cling so hard to the ideas of self. And this is exactly what Nichiren is pointing out. For us to understand what the Lotus Sutra teachings, what Buddhism teaches, that we are all things and all things are manifest through us, through our minds, through our sentience, that becomes harder and harder to even think that we can access it, let alone understand that we are it. We are Buddha-ness. But we're so veiled with all these multiple lenses and sunglasses and covers that we have over our mind of this obsession with identity. We need to take all of those off, including the blinders, maybe even just close our eyes for a minute and consider the universe that we see in our eyelids as our beingness. And when we open our eyes and focus on the Myoho character, on that mandala, we can activate our sentient mind to experience that totality. That entrance into that totality is Gohonzon. And that totality is Buddha-ness, the engine of life. Many ages have passed since the Buddha's demise and the Buddha's, or extinction, demise. Again, see the language bias? Let me read it again. Many ages have passed since the Buddha's extinction. And the Buddhist scriptures, or the Buddhist teachings, which were oral, are all misunderstood from the moment they were captured in writing, whatever language. Who these days has the wisdom to interpret them correctly? Indeed. And he includes himself in that statement, right? Therefore, the Buddha predicted in the Nirvana Sutra that in the latter day of the law, those who abide by the correct teaching, or the correct understanding of the meaning of the teachings, will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail. Remember that number, 8 billion? How many specks of dirt can you stick on a fingernail? Out of 8 billion, that's not a healthy percentage. While those who slander the correct teachings will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions. Notice he doesn't say everybody else. He's specifically calling out people who purport to be teaching Buddhism correctly, actually slandering, in other words, obfuscating the message, thwarting the message, redirecting the message in their egos. They'll be everywhere. Yeah, I get that. Right? I stand here with you. Remember my little experiment with the water and the pepper flakes on top and my finger with a little bit of dishwashing detergent on it. Boink. Yeah. In the Decline of the Law Sutra, we find a passage stating that those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the lands of the Ganges, but those who abide by the correct teaching will be no more than 1 or 2 pebbles. Though 500 years or 1,000 years go by, it will be difficult to find even a single person who believes in the correct teaching. Those who fall into the evil paths because of secular crimes, greed, anger, avarice, manipulation, world of anger, animality, blah, 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 will be as insignificant in number as the specks of dirt placed on a fingernail. But those who do so because of violations of the Buddhist teachings will be equal in number to the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions. More monks than laymen and more nuns than laywomen will fall into the evil paths. Those among us who influence it, those are the monks, right? Here Nichiren considers as follows. Already over 200 years have passed since the world entered the latter day of the law. I was born in a remote land, and moreover, I am a person of low station and a monk of humble learning. While being born again and again amid the six paths, right, moment to moment to moment, we're in our egos, we're in our samsaric mind, constantly migrating in the lower worlds, 3,000 realms in a single thought moment, but hovering toward the samsaric base worlds or realms, human. I have perhaps at times been born as a great ruler in the human or heavenly world, and have bent the multitudes to my will as a great wind bends the branches of small trees, and yet at such times I was not able to become a Buddha. Finally, he says it, or it's translated correctly, to become a Buddha, or Buddha, not Shakyamuni, but to realize my own enlightenment. So what's he saying there? Have you ever been in a position in your life, maybe you were 6 years old and you commanded all the other kids, we're going to do this now, and they all went, yeah. You were a ruler. You influenced the masses. Maybe you have a position at your job where you lead several other people, or you are led by other people. You understand the dynamics. At one moment, you're the ruler. At the next moment, you're a serf. At the next moment, you're out of a job. At the next moment, you're king of the world because you just got a new job, whatever. Remember, Buddhism is about the mind. And moment to moment, we live in a new world, completely rebuilt every single moment. I know that's hard to imagine, but really understand that's truly that. How often have you changed your mind about something from one moment to the next? Come on. It's obvious. If we can change our mind in an instant, why can't we influence it into the next instant? It's not positive thinking, it's actual manifestation. I studied the Hinayana and Mahayana Sutras, beginning as an ordinary practitioner with no understanding at all, and gradually moving upward to the position of a great bodhisattva. Wham! Finally! Something I've said ad nauseum. Nichiren is a bodhisattva, which is our goal. This is why he says, emulate me. He's telling, I started stupid, had no idea. I studied Hinayana and Mahayana as an ordinary practitioner, just a lay monk, student, gradually moving upward. And he studied at the temples throughout Japan, yeah? Great repositories of commentaries and sutras, etc. For 1 kalpa, 2 kalpas, countless kalpas, I devoted myself to the practices of bodhisattva until I almost reached the stage of non-regression, of staying in Namo Myoho Renge Kyo every moment of the day. And he's talking about kalpas and kalpas here, but you understand those kalpas are mental. They're, right, sitting on a nice flat bench for 5 minutes, no big deal. Same 5 minutes on a picket fence, it's unbearable. It feels like hours and hours. Kalpas. Focused, determined action takes a lot of dedicated time and effort. Realization, boop, time less. Yeah? Do you understand this time thing in Buddhism? until I almost reached, and yet I was dragged down by the powerful and overwhelming influences of obstacles, of distractions, of daily samsaric life, yeah? And I never attained Buddhahood. This is Nichiren talking about Nichiren now. I do not know whether I was among the third group who failed to take strong resolve when the sons of the great universal wisdom excellence Buddha preached the Lotus Sutra and again failed to attain Buddhahood during the lifetime of Shakyamuni Buddha, or whether I faltered and fell away from the teachings that I heard numberless major world system dust particle kalpas ago, and thus have been reborn in this age. Now that's very confusing, right? Not only these words, but these are translations of words. So, but I can tell you the merit of what he's saying is he wasn't with Shakyamuni 3,000 years ago, but he's not talking about that Shakyamuni. He's talking about during the lifetime of Shakyamuni Buddha. What is the lifetime of Shakyamuni Buddha? The lifespan chapter. Come on, Nichiren pounds on this. So when this says the lifetime of Shakyamuni Buddha, we're not talking about Shakyamuni anymore. We're talking about the Buddha-ness that Shakyamuni gets credit for attaining in his present life, in his life 3,000 years ago, but his exploration and expansion and teaching of that Buddha-ness. So Shakyamuni becomes just a label for that time without beginning Buddha-ness. And so what is Nichiren talking about? He's talking about his own, your own, my own timeless Buddha-ness, our ability to witness this process of the engine of life. It's always been there. We've just never alerted ourselves to it, as Shakyamuni did and taught. So I'm reborn this next moment into this samsaric reality. But I don't have to be here, but I'm slipping. I keep slipping out of it. Keep slipping out of this knowing, this clarity. I'm a bodhisattva. I know the clarity is there, but I haven't quite achieved being in it all the time. Later on, you'll read letters where Nichiren says, now I'm living every moment in Myoho Renge-kyo. He's achieved it. But he's still a bodhisattva, right? He's just a bodhisattva at the stage of non-regression. Is this all making sense? I hope so. I'm trying to make it crystal clear. While one is practicing the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, one may surmount all kinds of difficulties occasioned by the distracting forces of worldly life. I know it says evil here, but that word has too much charisma. It's really the distractions. Distractions of what? Distractions from our Buddha-ness. So yeah, you could say, well, those distractions are evil, but that's misleading. They're just distractions. We allow them to influence us poorly. See, it's on you and I. It's not some force outside of us. It's the forces within us that are the problem. Difficulty, need to be addressed, period. Right? You cut yourself. You put ointment on it, you cover it. You know what to do. Just do it. Or by the persecutions of rulers or non-Buddhists, or the followers of the Hinayana Sutras. Obstacles, distractions can come from anywhere. Still, they're just distractions. And yet one may encounter someone like Dao Cho, or Shantao, or Honen, monks who seemed thoroughly conversant with the teachings of the provisional and the true Mahayana Sutras, but who were in fact possessed by these evil influences, these obstacles, these distracted influences, right? For whatever, their agenda, their politics, their ego, who cares? It's not Buddhism. Such men seem to praise the Lotus Sutra most forcefully, in the way that they utilize it. But in fact, they belittle the people's capacity to understand it. Oh, the Lotus Sutra is beautiful, but you're not. That's for fancy people with, scholars and stuff. It's not useful for you. What? That's what they did, quoted many times, claiming that its principles are very profound, but that human understanding is slight. Oh, it's such a lofty teachings. We lowly humans can't possibly understand it. That's what it's for. The reason Buddhism exists is for us lowly beings. And so Honen runs around going, oh no, us lowly beings. No, you have to, eat this kind of peanut butter every day and it'll make you better, and maybe in a future life after you die, maybe. This religious thinking is a disease of mankind, yeah? And there it is in Buddhism. Nichiren's calling it out. They misled others by saying that, quote, not a single person has ever attained Buddhahood, end quote, through that sutra, or that, quote, not even one person in 1,000, end quote, can be saved by it. We're not trying to be saved by it. We're trying to liberate ourselves from our own self-caging, our own self-imposed limitations. Stop it. Be all that your potential offers for you to be. Experience it. Be in it. Being. Thus, over a period of countless lifetimes, people are deceived as often as there are sands in the Ganges until they abandon their strong resolve in the Lotus Sutra and descend into the teachings of the provisional Mahayana Sutras, abandon these and descend into the teachings of the Hinayana Sutras, and eventually abandon even these and descend to the teachings and scriptures of the non-Buddhist doctrines. I understand all too well how, in the end, people have come in this way to fall into the lower realms. It's just constantly deflated. Oh, you can never reach that. Well, why bother? I'll just do this. Oh, that's so far away and lofty. Just content yourself in little magical statements and pointing your finger a certain way and entertain yourself throughout your life. And, maybe sometime in the future, but who cares? Just have fun now. What the hell happened to Buddha-ness? I, Nichiren, am the only person in all of Japan who understands this. Can you understand what that must feel like? Have you ever felt, holy crap, how can I think this way? How can I do this with conviction when the entire world around me will just look upon me as something strange and odd and silly and stupid, or something to be feared or pushed away? You ever feel that way? One of the reasons this Sangha is so damn important. You are not alone, and others will seek you out. And most often there'll be people who are completely ignorant or from other sects that they've been disenchanted with and understood that they weren't correct. How do you prepare yourself for that? Because it's an exciting moment. It's a moment we crave, right? Because human beings, we're not solipsistic creatures. Even fish swim in groups. How do you prepare for it? You know what I'm going to say. You are preparing for it right now. Use the threefoldlotus.com website to download paperwork and answers to things so that you can keep your mind active in what? Buddha-ness. Chant. Chant every day. Anyone who is curious and asks you questions, first order of business, chant. Open that Gohonzon in their mind. Even though they don't understand it, they have no idea what name or label to put to it. That's not important. What's important is to prepare their consciousness. Open that ninth consciousness in their mind. Not in their brain, not in their bowels, in their mind, their cognitive state. Kick that Gohonzon door ajar, that Buddha eye. Once that happens, then your conversation becomes useful. Then the words of the teachings become useful. Not too much. Let the curious one lead the conversations. Otherwise, you'll just be like on the Peanuts, right? Yes, ma'am. What does this mean? No. Well, look here. What does this sentence say to you? Well, it makes me think, yeah, let them lead the conversation. Right? Because, why? Because fundamentally, the only place you can find Buddha-ness is in your own mind. And that's just as true for anyone asking you questions. Only they can open that Gohonzon mind and the Buddha eye within themselves. No amount of words or teaching going in their samsaric ears will somehow magically convert itself into Buddha-ness. They must do it for themselves, just like you and I are. All right. Gone on a long time today, so I'm just going to stop here. We will continue in the next video. Sounds like I'm ready to continue for hours here. I get excited about this stuff because Nichiren is so emphatic and clear that somehow, maybe it's just me, but I don't believe that. I believe you're the same way as I am. We're all of the same mind, Itai Doshin. So it upsets me in a way that people can read these, even as faulty as the translations are. I just can't believe in my heart that anyone who spends a real amount of time with curiosity reading through these sutras and Nichiren's letters and doesn't get the meaning, the truth in it. They've got to. And if they don't, there's some serious karmic obstacles in their way. And the only solution to that isn't reading more, it's frickin' chant. Open that door, kick it open, right? So that then when you go back and read, it becomes so obvious. Oh, how did I miss that? That's happened to me. Has it happened to you? Yeah. Another example of how we change karma, how our mind can be self-manipulated, right? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being on this journey and making these efforts with me, with yourself, with your friends, with your whoever you practice with. Thank you. Thank you. It's so profound. And that's why I well up with pride that you're doing this as well. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Don't forget, like, subscribe. Please do that. Helps us grow this influence. Yes? Buy those ebooks or print books if you prefer. Make sure you have a proper mandala. Most of all, take care of your health. Keep your practice strong. And I'll see you in the next one. Pretty much guaranteed. All right. Bye for now.